terrifying.
It is true. Weird model I made forever ago that I just use as like a sad demo object now. But yeah, so today is going to be a bunch of stuff that's sort of geared towards either like deformers, giving your objects a little bit more life, or sort of things that are good to know anyway, but will also help you set up better rigs. And we're going to go over, it's not strictly speaking required in this class, but a lot of you guys want to use rigs for your final, so we'll be going over that in the next, I think, week or two. And then the actual next weekly assignment actually involves using like a little pre-made rig and doing an animation with that, just so you can get a feel of actually animating with a rig.
The bag or the race set?
Yeah. I love the sack animation.
Casually borrowed that model from my scene week.
Nice.
Because I just did not want to make a sandbag for my scarecrow.
That's fair. All right, so anyway, so the first thing that I want to go over is driven keys. And that's basically just setting up a connection between an animation of one object and another. So a lot of times this will be used, honestly, I don't like setting them up, so I use a silly workaround for them, cough. But a lot of times they'll be used if you have like a finger, wow, these are awful hands. It's been a year since I've looked at this model. But you'll use them up for like finger controllers, so usually on a hand rig, you'll have like little joints in all the fingers, and rather than having to select 3 controllers manually and bend just like if you want to curl the finger in, you'll have one sort of general finger controller, and you can make a little custom attribute for that that sort of controls, if you set it up one time you can set up that one, what am I saying? Sorry. Instead of having to have 3 controllers you have to select every time you want to bend a finger, you can make one finger control, which will sort of control all of those finger rigs if you just need a generic, like, I'm going to bend all of my little fingers in the same way. And then if you need something more custom, you can go in and then modify the individual joints or the individual controls later. So I'm not going to actually show you that on anything that's particularly rigged. But I will just show you, again, with like my sketchy little sphere and cylinders, which I have become so fond of, and you guys are probably all very sick of by now. And I'll actually just set up some, like, basically sketchy, sad facsimile of a finger with these. So I'm just going to say that this little, this sphere is my control, and then imagine that each one of these cylinders is a joint in a finger. So basically what you can do is I'm going to add in a custom attribute for this, which is, again, really helpful for rigging if you need to make like weird custom keys like this. So if you select your object that you want the attribute on, go into your channel box. You should be able to do edit, add attribute. And again, this is just from your channel box. It's going to pull up this little box, so you can just name it whatever you want. I'll just call it finger bend. And I pretty much always make this keyable. I've never had a reason to make a non-keyable one. The few things you want to look at, so the data type is kind of important depending on how you want to use things. So usually if I want it to be a keyable value where you can have access to decimals and stuff like that, you're going to want to use a float. And if you guys have ever done any coding before, it's pretty much the same thing as that. So usually, again, for like general keying, if I want to scrub from a value of like 1 to 10 with nice smooth transitions, I'll use a float. Integer is going to let you use whatever number you want, but it's not going to give you options to decimals. So you have pretty much like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't do values of like 2.473 or something weird like that. Again, for those extra decimals, use a float. String is going to be some kind of text value, which I have never had cause to use ever. A Boolean, and these are like most of the ones, the float, integer, or Boolean are pretty much all the ones I use normally. Boolean is just like yes, no values. It's either on or it's off, a value of 0 or 1. And it's basically just like a toggle switch, like the visibility of your object is a Boolean. It's either visible or it's not. There's no like half visibility. So again, just select whatever data type you need. In this case, I'm going to go with the float. And if you want to, you can set a minimum and maximum for this, so that I'm just going to say 0 and 1. So basically at 0, your finger is going to be not bent at all, and at 1, it's going to be fully bent. And the default is just whatever value it starts out as, but that's easy to change, so I usually just kind of ignore that shamelessly. So you just hit add, and you can see that the sphere now has this custom attribute called finger bend. And if I grab this, I can scrub between the values, so you can see I have like values of 0.8, 7, whatever. And again, that is because I chose a float. And this is also keyable like any other thing that you might want to use. So it's just, again, really nice to be able to have this functionality, especially because like sometimes when you get into rigging with like IK handles, there's some attributes that you like really need to access, but they're buried really deep in your outliner. So you can add little controls like this for those. So in this case, that is adding custom attributes. Are there any questions about that? All right. If you guys ever actually need to delete an attribute, you should be able to go to Edit, again, in your channel box, the Edit menu. And you can delete the attribute if it's something that you made yourself. You can also go in and edit it. And that's mostly just going to be editing like the minimum and maximum, and if it's keyable or not. So whatever, if you select integer and you meant it to be float, you'll just have to remake the entire attribute. There's no way to go back and change that as far as I'm aware of. But you can rename them and tweak the minimums if you decide like, oh, I want the finger to actually curl backwards like behind the hand. I could set this minimum to be -1 or something like that. I don't really want to do that, so I'm not going to. So actually setting up a driven key so that the sphere controls the motions of these fingers. If you go into your animation menu, I'm not gonna lie, I like went over this yesterday and I'm like made notes on where all the menus are because I literally never use these because they annoy me. I'll show you a silly workaround that I usually use for stuff that can many times get you out of doing set-driven keys. Not always, but like a lot. Especially for fingers, they take so long to set up. Anyway, so if you go into your key menu, and this is again in your animation tab, go down to set driven key and open the little settings box next to set. It's going to pull up this ridiculous thing, and this is basically asking for what object do you want to be your driver, your control. That's actually going to modify the other objects. In this case, it's my sphere. So I'm just going to hit load driver. You'll notice it's actually auto-loaded it as the driven object, which in this case is not so much what I want. Oh, I should actually. I'm going to really quick just set these fingers up as a sort of parented deal. So you'll see if you parent the fingers, they do sort of behave in a way that vaguely resembles a finger. And I'm just going to go through, again, instead of having to select all of these every time I want to move something, just control that with this little sphere. So in this case, I need to go through manually for pretty much every object and go down. I've actually forgotten. Can I do? So select all my objects and I'll do load driven. And you can load multiple objects at once. And in this case, you need to basically select what value or what attribute you want to drive the other ones on the sphere. So in this case, I'm bending the finger. I would like the finger bend attribute I just made to control the motion of that finger bend. So I'm just going to click on that. And then you can go in and, which way did I say these are bending? Rotate X. So you can go into all of your objects and just select Rotate X. And as of now, it's not actually done anything. You've not actually hooked anything up. You need to actually sort of key these on each value that you want set, if that makes sense. So basically with this finger bend on 0 and all of these objects not rotated at all, you can key that. And then what you want to do to set the next key is go and set finger bend to 1. And then you need to physically move all of these objects to where they should be when finger bend is at 1. So in this case, I'm just going to rotate them and say cool, close enough. And you can see actually that it's put a little dark blue line noting that the rotation of these objects is being controlled by another attribute. But I should be good at that point once I have everything in position. Just go back in and once again hit key. So theoretically, if I now scrub between the finger bend attribute of 0 and 1, you can see that the finger is, like all of these 3 objects are being controlled by this one little set-driven key. Anybody have any questions on that so far? All right. But yeah, so it's really powerful. Usually, I'll use set-driven keys if I need like specific finger positions for things. In the case of like this finger rotation, I almost never set up set-driven keys for fingers. I just, again, I don't know. I'm lazy and it takes a while, so I usually just don't do it. So here is my silly workaround for, oh my, for finger rotation. And what if I grab the correct ones? All right, so let me just double check. All right, so cool. So this one actually doesn't, if you duplicate the objects, apparently it does not transfer the set-driven key values over, which in this case is very convenient. So again, silly workaround for this if you just need a like straight translation, like if I switch this attribute and I want to rotate it, like if I want this attribute to directly represent the values it's modifying, if that makes sense. I'm just going to reset this up and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about because that was really weird. So I'm going to make a new attribute. Again, edit menu in your channel box, add attribute, finger bend lazy. And then I want this keyable. I also want this to be a float. And in this case, I'm not going to set any minimum and maximum on this. I'm just going to sort of assume that I can look at a finger and figure out, oh, it's clipping through the hand. I should maybe not rotate this as much. So I'll hit add. And you can see that because I've not specified a min and max, I can enter pretty much whatever value I want for this finger bend lazy attribute. I will set this back to 0. And what I'm going to do now is not the set-driven key menu. I am going to go into Windows, General Editors, and you're looking for component or connection editor, sorry. So again, that's Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor. And this is what I use a lot for like IKs on legs. So I always botch the direction that these are going. But basically grab your controller, in this case my little sphere 2, scroll down, and you want to select, same way you did with the set-driven keys, where you have to like select the object you want to be connected. Just click on that. And then in this case I do need to go and add each object individually. So I'm just going to I'll start at the tip of the finger. And I want this finger bend lazy to control the rotate. And you can see that's grayed out because it's you can only connect it to rotate X, or like one attribute at once, not all of the rotates. So you can see that now if I scrub the finger bend lazy, it is controlling the bend of this top finger. Excuse me. And so this is like a rotation of like 104.3 degrees. And if I look at the rotation X on this object, it is also 104.3. So basically what I've done is created a direct link between whatever this number is and just applying that automatically to the rotation. If I was so inclined, you can map this to multiple rotations. So if I also pipe that into like rotate Z and rotate X, it's going to give me some weird rotation, which in this case I don't want. To undo that, basically just unclick the objects that are not highlighted blue, and then I can go back in and just set those back to 0. So if I go back and basically just do that for all my fingers, I'll leave the rotation just set at 104 because it's not really going to hurt anything if it is. So I'm going to click on the second joint in the finger, do reload right, and then again just hook that up to the rotate X. And you'll actually notice that since the value is already set at 104 for finger bend lazy, it's also just automatically piped that into the rotation of the little second joint in the finger. So again, do that for the third one, and we have rotate X, and now it's rotating very aggressively. So that's usually my sort of lazy way for setting up set-driven keys that doesn't involve me like positioning a bunch of stuff and like scaling through things. It works pretty much exactly the same way, and you can see that now I'm able to just sort of bend this back and forth however much I want. The downside of doing things like this is, like for a set-driven key, if you set the value of a max at 1 and you key it so it's, imagine this finger is like hitting your palm, it pretty much ensures that the finger is never going to clip through the hand. Where here I can obviously do some like real weird stuff with the rotation, which maybe is functionality you need, maybe it's not, but it is just something to be aware of. With this, you do need to be a little bit more careful maybe of like how you animate things so nothing gets broken. Anyone have any questions on that? All right. So the difference in this case between set-driven keys, I talked about fingers. So like for bending the finger down, I feel like most times I usually just end up bending all the finger joints at the same time. Where a set-driven key might be better over this method is if you're bending the finger backwards. I know like if you try to bend your finger back, most times I feel like it's like these upper joints here are not rotating backwards because that would be like breaking your finger. What usually happens is it'll just sort of bend backwards like at the palm. So that would be like more of a custom shape than just saying, okay, bend all of the fingers back like this. So that would be something where a set-driven key would come in handy if I added a value of -1 to this, so like backwards finger bend basically. I could go in and set that custom shape for that back finger bend. It's also good for like eyelids and some other weird stuff like that. Or if you need, again, like specific shapes where the rotations of everything are different and not just sort of generically the same number. Does that make sense? All right, any questions on set-driven keys or the little connection editor hack I just showed you? All right, cool, so that is pretty much that. 5 seconds, all right, I did all of that already. All right, the other thing I want to go over really quick is setting limits for your objects. And I'll try this on just like a normal cylinder, and then I'm actually really curious to see if this works on something with a set-driven key, and I might test that. But basically, if you go into your attribute editor and click on in this case, it's like the P cylinder node, there's a little tab for limit information, and you can actually set minimum and maximum values for the rotation of certain objects. So in this case, I'll just go into my rotate X and I'll set a minimum I'll just leave it at the default -45 degrees and a max of 45 degrees. So if I go in and try to rotate that on my rotate X, you can see that as soon as I hit 45 degrees, it physically will not let me rotate it anymore. Same thing for going backwards. So this is really handy for stuff like doors. If you need to, open and close a door, you can set a limit for that. So once it hits the door frame and it's closed, you can't rotate it any farther. It ensures it's not going to clip through your wall. And then same thing for like opening the door. If there's a door stop and you want it to stop at a specific spot, you can set a limit for that so it's automatically going to stop and you just like don't ever need to think about it again. If you ever want to turn those off, just uncheck the values, and then I should be able to rotate that however much I want. So that was rotate. There's also limits for translate and scale. They all pretty much work exactly the same. That's pretty much limits. Does anybody have any questions on that? All right. Truth be told, I've never actually used these for anything functional, but I was like, when I learned about them, I'm like, wow, that would be super helpful for things. And then that was kind of like when I stopped doing animations, so I just haven't used them. But again, really good for stuff like doors. I'm actually curious to see, I think I've tried this before, but I did mention like what happens if you key this on objects that already have values on them. So I just put limits on the rotations of these for the same just default 45 degrees. And apparently it will completely override, except wait, what did I just check the limits for? Yeah, so it does look like if you've set up something with a connection editor, it will just shamelessly override the limits that you set, which is actually weird because it's still, oh no, it doesn't shamelessly override that. That's actually kind of cool. Interesting. So you could actually go through if you wanted to. You can see like when I set that limit, it's actually snapping back. Oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, okay. Weird. So if you wanted to, you could actually sort of set up quote unquote fake set-driven keys. where if you do need that like specific information where like maybe this joint just doesn't rotate as far, you could set a little limit for it so that it stopped as soon as it hit that value. Same thing for like rotating the fingers backwards. So that's a thing you could do. That I would say is actually a little bit less flexible almost than a set-driven key. Because set-driven keys you can at least go through and sort of change the values more modularly, but like functionally for most circumstances it would actually probably be pretty similar. Interesting. Cool. So again, that's limits part 2. Are there any questions on that? All right. In that case, the other thing that I wanted to go over today is some blend shapes and also deformers. So basically just like different types of deformers. Really quick though, since I did import this like horrifying figure, I will show you the one thing that I often use the connection editor for rigging. So if you go in and you set up a skeleton IK handle, and I'll go over all of this more in detail when I actually go over rigging. But basically, an IK handle just sort of lets you move the leg up and down in a sort of logical way. And I've done no weight painting on this, so the legs are being ripped apart. But there is an attribute on this handle called twist, and that basically controls the rotation of the knee, which sometimes on IK handles gets like super crazy broken and just looks like really bad. So you can see like if I scrub that, it's just like the rotation of the knee. So I usually set up controllers on the ankle controls to just access that, so I don't need to click on this IK handle every single time I want to modify the twist. So again, just do a quick attribute. I'll use the wrong controller from the wrong ankle, but just edit, add attribute, flow, and I'll make this one a float. And again, no minimum or maximum, because I do want like smooth rotations, and I'm just going to hook it up in the connection editor. I do find that like, I don't know, IK handles and rigs get real weird sometimes. So again, if you need the connection editor, it's Windows, General Editors, and Connection Editor. And grab your control, select the terribly named attribute, grab your IK handle, and input that in, or click reload right to actually load that. And then just go down and find the twist value. And then you should be able to then, with this defor attribute I've just made, rotate the knee around. So if you guys ever get rigs from me, I usually do that with little ankle attributes for things. But again, more of a functional demonstration with like something I actually use frequently for rigging. All right, so deformers. I'll use the person because it seems fun. So there's a few different types of deformers. I'm going to go over the this is my example of like good versus horrible topology. There are a few different types. We actually already kind of talked about some of them before. I know I went over some of them in CGI. I'm just going to go back to my modeling menu, and mostly looking at. I'll go over lattice deformers really quick if you guys have never seen them. So there's the deform menu at the top, lattice deformer. I'm just going to open the settings, and it works pretty much the same as a lattice deformer in like Photoshop or Illustrator. So just select your object, figure out how many little divisions you want on the X, Y, and Z axes, and then just hit apply. And you can see it's put this person in like a ridiculous little box. And if I right-click on the deformer, I can basically select lattice points, which are just like vertices for the box, and shift those around. And it's going to sort of interactively drag my model around to be shaped differently, again, depending on which little nubs that I grab. In case any of you ever want to use symmetry with a lattice deformer, that does actually work, which is delightful. So if I grab, like this guy here, I can shift this over, and it's going to do the same thing on the other side. Honestly, I barely use these for animation, like ever, but I do a lot of modeling for 3D printing, and like if you're scaling an arm piece and you need like a wider wrist, but you want the top to be the same, I'll sort of do something like that a lot. where I will just, what am I doing? I'll just get rid of the lattice deformer and then just pretty much set all of the divisions to 2, hit apply, and then you can just grab the whole top of your object and just scale it up. And it'll do a very nice like linear transition between the top and the bottom if that's ever something that you need. People ask about that like literally all the time for like on the 3D modeling Facebook groups I'm in. They're like, I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, it's so easy. So that's pretty much a lattice deformer. Any questions on those? All right. Otherwise, mostly, again, I'm just going to be going over some of the nonlinear deformers. So same thing under the deform menu. There is a tab for nonlinear. And the ones that I use most frequently, so flare deformer, if you ever need it, is kind of the, I literally never use those. Pretty much the same thing as I just showed you with the, there we go. What am I saying? With the lattice deformer. Benefit of this is that it's actually animatable. You can key lattice deformer points. I just don't recommend it. So with a flare deformer, you can see it's actually, when I made that, it's added a little node for it in my outliner. And then if I go to my channel box under my object, you'll see that I have access to the deformer there. And I can modify, oh my god. This looks a little bit like a Slovene from Doctor Who. Anybody? Kind of? Yeah, okay. So I can modify any of these values. And again, I can keyframe these if I want to. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility over how this works. Functionally, I very rarely ever actually use these. But you can sort of play with the, so curve is kind of like how, the interpolation basically between the 2 points. So you can see that if that's not uncomfortable at all. But it basically just like sort of lets you control things a little bit of a different way. You can see it's making like a little bit of like a sine curve or like a kind of wave through the model. If you ever need it to be flared and kind of like bent a little bit, you can use that. Low bound, high bound are quite nice for making like weird, I don't know why you'd want this particular effect, but you can do some really weird stuff by sort of playing with the low bound and the high bound. I'm picturing this for some reason for something like a Twizzler. But you can play with those, and again, all of these values are keyable, so they should be pretty decent for like at least making weird shapes in a model, but also animating them if you ever need like weird functionality out of your objects. That's a flare handle. Again, very infrequently do I use these, even with like all of the extra stuff that you can do with them. Any questions on them? All right. So if you, in case I haven't mentioned, if you just delete the handle itself, it will bring your object back to the original shape that it was previously. So next type of deformer I want to go over, and these are going to be the ones that I actually use frequently, is the bend deformer, and I do actually use this one kind of a lot. So if you go in, again, it's made a little node in your outliner. If you go into pretty much same thing before, you'll notice there's, instead of a flare input, there's one for the bend deformer. And key value here is going to be curvature, also deeply uncomfortable. So you can modify that, and then in this case, again, low bound and high bound is just going to be how much of your model it's affecting. So basically, it'll kind of cut your model in half. In this case, like about halfway through the torso. And anything on the legs is considered like, quote unquote, the low part of the model, and anything on the top is considered the high part. So if you modify that low bound, you can sort of change how much of the body is actually being affected by this. So you can potentially just do something slightly less terrifying and get like a bent person like that. But again, all of these are keyable values. And if you select the deform handle itself and rotate that around, it's going to change how your object is bending. So one thing I actually use these a lot just for modeling is actually for making rings, which sounds really weird. But they're very convenient. You can basically make a flat shape and then bend it into a perfect circle. So I'm just going to set the low bound and the high bound back to 1. and set my curvature. What is at low bound should be? Great. So you can see that I've basically just made like a really disturbing human sort of ring shape, kind of. That's, yeah. I don't know. I really enjoy like breaking models. It's kind of fun. So the other thing that you'll notice is that if you move, oh my god, if you move the deformer, it will sort of change the way that your object is deforming. So if you ever want, and same thing if you move the object without moving the deformer, it's also going to change the way that that object looks. If you want to get around that, what you can do is just take your deformer and parent that under your figure. So if you basically, you can still move the deformer and that's still going to mess with your object. But if you take the object, it'll take the deformer with it so that you can move it without it being horribly distorted and just like mangled. Any questions on that so far? All right. So that's a bend deformer. And again, if you wanted to, like I could set up a custom attribute because it is kind of annoying to like select the skin, go into your channel box, like grab the curvature node. So if you ever wanted to do like squash and squish or bend on an object, you could make a little controller for the character and then make a custom attribute and hook it up to the curvature of this bend deformer. So that you could basically just select that controller and have access to all of the controls on your deformers that you put on it for animating. Does that make sense? All right. And if I was happy with this shape, I could actually just delete history on my object. And that would delete both the deformer. Actually, well, it would just delete the deformer and then leave the object in the same shape that it was, which in this case is horrifying, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to grab my deformer and again, just delete that. It'll snap my person back up to the original shape. And then I'm ready to demo the next random deformer. And I'm not going to spend like a whole lot of time on these. Other one I use pretty frequently is the twist deformer. Pretty much works the same way. You got low bound and high bound attributes. And then you can control the start and end angles of your item. So this could be, ooh, that's actually probably the easiest way I've ever found to make a helix. Like a proper double helix. Why have I never thought of that before? But anywho, so you can do kind of like weird stuff like this with it. Again, also keyable. And if I decided like, hey, I want this weird twisty shape, and I also want this to like be bendy, what I can do is go and just grab my object again, go and just add another bend deformer on it. So if I edit the curvature of this, you can see that both of the deformers, both the bend and the twist, are still applied to my object. And if you ever wanted to, so say I was like, maybe for some reason I'm imagining this just sort of like being attached to the ground at the feet and then like bending back and forth at the top. I'm just going to shift my deformer so that it starts at the ground. I just sort of found this to be the easiest way to do it. And now when I modify the curvature, you can see it's not really, this is just sort of dead space, so it's only doing the top of the object. And it sort of stops at the legs, and that's just a matter of editing the high bound to control the rest of the object. So now what I have is basically like this terrifying, like bouncy swizzle person. And if I wanted to, I could also grab the rotation of the deformer and key something. So I'm keying both the curvature of, what am I saying? Both the curvature of the bend and also rotating it at the same time. So it's like bouncing back and forth in more than just one direction like that. So this could be good for if you're doing ever like a jack-in-the-box that pops up or something like that. You need like that weird sort of back and forth like springy motion. You could do something like this for it. But yeah, deformers totally stack. I can continue to modify the twist deformer as needed. It's just so deeply uncomfortable. But yeah, so that's pretty much that. And again, I'm just going to grab both of these and actually I'll grab my twist and delete that. And then you can see the bend deformer still applies. I still don't want it, so I'm going to get rid of it. And then there's also some like other ones that I personally don't use frequently. I mean, we just talked about the sine, little sine deformer. That basically is going to make, so amplitude, I believe, is like what actually controls that. And then the wavelength is basically how, I'm really bad with like wave terminology apparently. Did y'all have to take that weird physics class? I feel like you probably would know about like the wavelengths and stuff, if that was the case. This is honestly one of those ones where I usually just like sort of play with values until it does something that I kind of want. Playing with offset is apparently a very pleasing way to make something wiggle back and forth like this. But yeah, so like that's pretty much what the sine wave does. Drop off appears to be sort of, I guess, how aggressive the point of that object or the point of the curve is. So it looks like when it hits the peak of that wave, it sort of is much pointier and less rounded, if that's the thing you need. And then again, standard high and low bound. So that's a sine deformer. I really like that jiggly motion. That was actually quite nice. And then there's other ones like, again, wave deformer. Whoops. Wave deformer is fairly similar, honestly, to the sine deformer. Oh my. All right. Sometimes I'll just add deformers to objects and see what happens. This totally looks like a squid now. But basically, by default, this one starts it up as a wave on the y-axis. And same thing, you can play with the wavelength if you want to. So you have more or less squiggles. Offset also gives you some like really uncomfortable effects here. And then drop off. So this, I mean, honestly, to me, this pretty much just looks like a sine deformer that has been rotated 90 degrees and pretty much looks like what this is. I've honestly never tested it because I never really had a reason to use these, but yeah, this pretty much looks just like a sine deformer. I think actually, and I could be wrong, but it looks like there is a slight difference in the way this works. So unless I'm going crazy, the wave deformer is kind of like a ripple. So like if you dropped a drop of water, so you drop something into water, all of the ripples or the waves are going to come from a central point. So it looks like if I use the offset on this, you can see that it's sort of, it looks like kind of the middle point always stays the same. It's just going back and forth, if that makes sense. So this would be good, again, for like ripples in the water. It does look like, oops. So really quick, I'm actually kind of curious now. If I throw a sine deformer on that, I think that one behaved a little bit differently. Okay, yeah, so it looks like the sine deformer is going to do kind of different things on either side of that middle point, whereas the wave deformer was sort of symmetrical going outwards from that center point, if that makes sense. Again, functionally, they seem more or less the same, and I've honestly never found a reason to use either in my personal work, but they do exist. Any questions on any of those so far? All right. That is pretty much, and then there's like a squash deformer, which I feel like is fairly self-explanatory. That's pretty much all the nonlinear deformers, plus a few that I barely ever use. Any questions on that before we move on to the last thing for the day? All right. So the last thing for today is blend shapes. And that is when you need, say, like custom modifications to something that something like bending the whole object in half isn't quite what you need. So one thing that these are often used for is facial expressions. So if I just run in, and I am fairly certain I have not made this model symmetrical at all. So I'm just going to sort of make a really sad-looking smile on this character. Oh, God. Okay. Fantastic. A lopsided grin, if ever I've seen one. And I'll do another one where perhaps the character is looking a little bit angry, which will be equally bad, I promise you. I will at least not drag the back of the head around. This is the 5-second version of anger. All right, so if this is like facial expressions or, you know, some kind of other, you know, modification you want to add onto your model, that again, like this is something that, you know, a basic deformer is not going to accomplish. You can sort of custom model in these changes, in this case like the smile, and then go in and add what's called a blend shape. And And that's basically just going to say, hey, I'm going to grab this original object and sort of deform it until it looks like this other object I've created. So to set up a blend shape, all right, go into your Windows tab and animation editors, and then there should be this little, my computer's like a purple icon that says shape editor next to it. Click on that shape editor, and basically what you want to do is it's sort of like setting up a constraint, or like half the other stuff we did. So grab your object, grab your, what is it? Sorry, you select the blend shape first, so the shape you want your original mesh to turn into, and then the object you want to be deformed. So in this case, the object that you want changed or deformed is always going to be the last thing that you select. And once you have that done, just do create blend shape. So you'll see that it's created a little node here, right under for blend shape 1, and I can rename this into like face shape or whatever. You can rename it if it doesn't have spaces. I'm super bad about that. So you can see that, name it to something logical if you can. And then it's also added a little input down here, also in my channel box, for that blend shape. And it will rename that to whatever you name it here. So if I click on that, you can add it, you can edit it either in the channel box or in this window. But basically, if I look at this and I slide the, if I use the slider, you can see that the face is sort of changing depending on how much of the slider value I've applied. So at 1, it's pretty much saying, all right, this entire thing looks like, it's like just copy this model basically. But you can also do like, I just want like a sad little half smile, like a little cheeky little grin or something like that, and just do like a value of 0.5. And that's basically kind of what blend shapes are in a nutshell. And again, if you want, you can grab the node for that in the channel box and also edit that there. It's also going to do the same slider values at the same time. Any questions on what a blend shape is, or like how to set up a really basic one? All right. So same thing with deformers. You can add multiple blend shapes to a single object. So in this case, if I decide, like, oh snap, I need another facial expression, in this case my creepy anger face, what you can do is actually just click on that blend shape and, what is it? It's add target. Yes, good. All right, so select the shape you want to add and the blend shape that you want to add it to, and then just do add target. And you can see that it's added another slider for that. The edit menu is basically saying that you want to change the shape of your blend shape after creating it, if that makes sense. So if I'm like, oh, it turns out that I actually want this one eye to like come down a little bit lower than the other one, it lets you sort of modify your blend shapes after they've been created. So you don't need to like, oh, I want to change the eye. It looks like I need to delete my blend shape and like reset it up. It's just getting around that. So once you're done modifying your object, in that case, I really don't like that, it's uncomfortable, just switch this edit mode off. But, wait, what? What are you doing? Hang on. It's been a while, also been a while since I had to actually like set up multiple blend shapes. I literally just did this. All right, hang on. All right, new plan. There's another way to add those that for me usually works better. So if you ever want to delete a node, just grab whatever object you don't want and just trash it. Little trash menu in the upper right. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just pretty much set up another blend shape, kind of like the same thing that I did already. So grab the object that you want the shape shifted into, and then the object you want modified. And if you go up to the deform menu where you found all of your other like nonlinear deformers and stuff, you can go in, if you scroll down a little bit, there's like a drop down for blend shapes, and you can just hit add right there. And it pretty much does the same thing, except this time it actually works. That's usually how I'm familiar with setting up blend shapes. So you can see that again, single blend shape, and I'm able to control both the mouth and the eyes at the same time. And again, also accessible through your channel box. So any questions on that? All right. If you want to, I'm just going to grab this whole blend shape and actually just delete that really quick. You can set, if you know you have like a bunch of things you want to set up at once, just select all of the, again, shapes that you want the original to change into, and then the original object last, and just go back in and do create blend shape, and it'll set that up automatically from the beginning without you needing to like go in and worry about adding or getting rid of stuff. Does that make sense? Cool. So again, really great for facial animations, especially if you don't want to set up any kind of facial rig. Like I could just set up this character to sort of blink some way or another, or do like weird little grins and stuff. So if you guys have stuff like that you want to do on your final, blend shapes are a great way to achieve that. And blend shapes are also attachable over rigs. So you can have rigs with blend shapes on them, and that works perfectly fine. All right, so just for grins, and I'm just going to show you so I'm going to grab Skin Janky 3 and say, like, I want spikes coming out of this head. So I'm just going to hit edit for this, and then it should let me go in with the faces and be like, great, weird horns. Apparently I'm happy with that because I'm going to turn edit mode off. And then theoretically, once I slide this Skin Janky node, it's also going to add those horns in because this object has been modified. Which that functionality did not used to be there like 3 versions of Maya ago, and it was really annoying if you needed to change a blend shape. Apart from that, if you guys ever need to, like you can delete the skins that you originally hooked the blend shape up with. So if I just get rid of those, and it will save all of the information from the blend shape. Which is like one of the few things that Maya actually does that for. It's honestly really nice. The downside of doing that, and I usually don't do this, if you ever need to modify or reset up your blend shape, you don't have those skins anymore. So in that case, like you're pretty much stuck with whatever you have. And if you were to delete like the smiling face from your blend shape, there's no way to get it back because you've just deleted the mesh. So I'll usually just sort of like make a really awkward little like group for like hidden group for just like blend shape. So if I ever need to go back and like find those, I can. And again, that's just sort of like non-destructive workflow in my opinion. But yeah, so that's pretty much blend shapes. Anyone have any questions about that? All right. So for grins, and again, blend shapes are one of those other things where it's like kind of annoying to access. So what you could do is like put a little controller around this face, make some custom attributes, and have those attributes drive the facial features of this character. And that is pretty much really, really common in rigging. Out of curiosity, I'm going to see what happens if I put a twist deformer on this, because I've honestly just never tried it, and I'm curious. It works! Hooray! So you can do twist deformers and blend shapes at the same time if you ever need to. But yeah. That is basically all I have for you guys today. Are there any questions on anything I talked about? All right, in that case, go be free. Stop.